Hi, friends. Welcome to Season 2 of Bar of the Conference. I'm your host, Derek Scott III. Today's episode is with Sarah Wilke. This episode is a bit different. I was attending the Reconciling Ministries Network Convocation a couple of weeks ago in Charlotte, North Carolina, and had the opportunity to host a live interview with Sarah Wilke, who has an incredible story. She's a part of the Wilke family, which has deep roots and a legacy in United Methodism in the States, particularly as it relates to disciple Bible study. But I just need you to know that this is definitely one of those moments that Derek's lack of planning really takes center stage a little bit. Well, actually, the interview takes center stage. So we're using an open air mic in this small room with some friends listening on. And so you're going to hear a lot of background noise. But this is such a great interview. And we really only got started. So there's going to be another interview with Sarah Wilke where we talk a little bit more about her story and hear some of her thoughts on the future of United Methodism. And so I hope that you enjoyed this live interview of Bar of the Conference with Sarah Wilke. It was so good. And even with all of the lack of planning, I just thought that you all would want to hear it. So grab that notebook, that choice beverage, and let's listen in to this live interview with Sarah Wilke. Friends, I want to present to you Sarah Wilke, who is a mentor to me and a friend and just an incredible leader within the United Methodist Church. And so I'm really excited to have you, Sarah, on the podcast. I just, when Jan and I were talking about who might I interview live here at RMN Convocation, there were a list of 3 people, and Sarah Wilke was number 1. And Jan was like, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. And so I was really grateful that you were willing to join me on this live podcast with a great group of friends in the room as well. And so Sarah, I always start out these interviews really kind of asking about the beginning, how you became a United Methodist Christian, how God's prevenient grace has acted in your life to bring you into our church. And so I'd just love to hear some of that story.
Yeah. So, I baptized in from infancy, right? So my father's United Methodist clergy, and grew up in the parsonage. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the beginning. Your faith, you have to claim you have to claim your own well. Mm-hmm. And dig your own well sometimes, and not just live off your ancestors. But I think my faith was nurtured, and I have to say, not only how I became a United Methodist Christian, but how I've stayed a United Methodist Christian is probably the second part of that that's important to me. But in the pews were people who, when they gave when the congregation contributes to the baptismal vow and says that we will help to raise this child in a way that leads to life eternal, there are people who believe that who live that. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in pews, in churches where the people in the pews really nurtured through Bible school and Sunday school and church choir, youth choir, camp. Oh my gosh, camp counselors. We just the people who, and I've been a camp counselor, y'all. It is not my call. It is not my call, and so it makes me so grateful for the people that did do that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I stayed a United Methodist because of the people who nurtured me and continue to nurture me to this day, and pray for me and believe in me. I also was raised in a home. I will say I got frustrated as a preacher's kid with some Sunday school teachers who, some, bless us, we're all just lay people doing our best. But I've had it said to me, well, you're the preacher's kid. You should know the answer to that. And I said, my parents don't teach this curriculum to us every day before we come to church on Sunday.
Right.
They live their faith. And I was grateful that I grew up in a home where the scripture was so precious and so cherished, but not as a weapon, but as a plowshare. Very much saw the scripture and taught us the scripture as a gift, as a precious gift. Not a weapon. So that's the shorter. I can go longer, but and you just have to edit it out.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we'll edit it. It's really, really good stuff. And we'll dive in. So, I mean, some of us are aware that your last name is Wilke.
Well,
and
even me.
and that there's great history and legacy, I would say, from the Wilke family. So what was it like? And some of us might need to know who your parents were, and we might want to hear some of that.
So when I was a senior, after I graduated from college that year, my father was elected a bishop of the church and served as Bishop of Arkansas for 12 years. Prior to that, even my parents began developing the Disciple Bible Study series, and it was because my father was pastor of a large downtown church in Wichita, Kansas, and they wanted 1,000 people in Sunday school. That was the goal. And they hit that goal. I want to go on record because you could in that. This was 35 years ago that they hit that goal. And it was because they found every way possible to help lay people lead Sunday school classes. So the impetus for Disciple Bible Study was my dad saying to a layman in the church, it was a strong layman, I think he was an attorney. I know he was an attorney. And my dad said, I want you to help start a new Sunday school class. And the layman said, oh, preacher, I don't know the Bible well enough. Well, if I were to, just a quick editorial aside, one of the things that is really plaguing our denomination is we stopped knowing the Bible again. We relinquished it. And I think the LGBTQ community assumed the Bible had nothing good to say, and so swam away or veered away. Because of the clobber passages, we didn't see the good passages, and we didn't put things in context. So I did grow up the youngest child of Dick and Julia Wilke, but my dad wasn't elected a bishop till I'd graduated from college. So I didn't have to grow up in that world. I actually joined the Peace Corps and left the country for the first 2 years of that. I was gone. So that was good. But I think then when, as my own career developed, at first you're going, I do not want, I don't want to have that baggage hanging over me as I try to make my own way and be my own person. But one of my favorite stories, so Dallas became the world I worked in. I led a Methodist mission in Dallas, owned by the formerly known as United Methodist Women, now United Women in Faith, in Dallas. And I knew I was speaking 70, 80 times a year, trying to raise money for our little mission and get the word out, do our thing. And so I knew North Texas. And my dad was at a board of trustees meeting for Southern Methodist University. And he met a woman who was a major shaker and mover, chair of the board for SMU. And he introduces himself, and she said, "Oh, are you Sarah Wilke's father?" I know if you're on the podcast, you cannot see me waving my arms in the air in joy, but it was the first time it wasn't, "Oh, are you Dick Wilke's daughter?" It was the other way around. And my dad said, "Well, I guess I found my niche in Nashville. I am only your," it was great. It was a fun moment for us. But I did grow up in a bit of a bubble. My mother was very, very intentional about creating safe space in our home. Very nurturing, you can let your hair down. You don't have to hold your breath in that someone's going to criticize something or whatever. And because there was a time we literally had a parsonage with an adjoining sidewalk to the church.
Oh, wow.
And, people would just walk into your home as if it was theirs, because theoretically it was, but boundaries, boundaries, people.
Yeah.
But grew up, but as a preacher's kid, when you're little, it's great because you can always run over to the church and it was your playground. But as you got older, and luckily as we got older, we didn't live next door to the church. There was a little bit more freedom. But my mom created the safe space. And to be honest, none of the four of us were particularly rebellious. And I don't know if that's just not our nature or if it's our mother just making it safe to be all of who you were.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. And within your family, your siblings, are all four of you still connected to ministry on some level?
Yeah. So my oldest brother is the executive director for the Institute for Discipleship. So years ago, I don't know, 20 years ago, my parents endowed this institute at Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas, the Institute for Discipleship. And my brother ran it as a volunteer for years, and then he retired and became executive director. And that's where we're developing Bible study and Christian small group study opportunities, and have been for 20 years, but now we've done the app, and we'll talk about that probably. But and then my next brother's clergy, serves in Topeka, Kansas, and his congregation just became a reconciling congregation. So
cool.
Proud of him. My sister's married to a United Methodist pastor, Rob Fuqua, in Indianapolis, Indiana, and his congregation is very inclusive and progressive, but also a mainstream 6,000 member church in Indianapolis. So he's got a lot to say grace over. And me. And I've served as a layperson in ministry, from mission to publishing to camp and retreat. I mean, I've kind of done a little of everything.
And I want to talk about that, but I'm wondering, was there? I know a lot of PKs, and not all preachers' kids, even in our system, really sort of emerge as deeply engaged in the life of the church, and we all find our path, right? But it seems that the four of you, to the degree that sometimes the church doesn't always know boundaries, the church seemed to still be a space that you all wanted to really bring your gifts. I'm curious, was that just because of the family and just the way that the tenor of the family, or was there other things just happened that all four of you landed?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anything just happens per se. I should step back and say my oldest brother, Steve, who leads the Institute, is married to a United Methodist clergy. So she became a pastor later. So we really have circled all the wagons around it. But I get asked this a lot, usually just in a one-on-one in an elevator or something. How is it that you are still involved in the church as a preacher's kid when I'm not quite sure. Again, I go back to the people in the pew who nurtured us through those years. I have to give them credit because we had so many people who, they'd pay attention to, in the little towns, they'd pay attention to whatever you were doing in school or sports or whatever. And in the bigger places, they just celebrated what you were doing in the church. If you were in the choir or whatever, they'd come and support the choir concert or the whatever. I do think my mother was, it's not like my father wasn't intentional, but you can imagine my father was running with his tongue hanging out, trying to both develop, disciple. We call that our fifth child in the family, because really it sucked up a lot of our time. My folks spent a good decade developing 1, 2, 3, and 4. And, there were holidays where you'd go, where'd Dad just go? Oh, he's got to get back to writing. And you're like, well, I'm only home for 48 hours, but he was trying to bust it. So bust it out. I think that Gosh, that's such a hard question because I don't know why we were able to hold it all together. I will tell you, even now, my mother's passed away in 2016. My father's 93, and it's up to us 4 kids to manage this family that we have. And it's large. My siblings they procreated, and now their children are procreating. So we're getting bigger all the time, but we are intentional. We're intentional about resolving conflict. We're intentional about engaging the conflict if it needs to be engaged. When I came out to every member of my family one-on-one. It was, my wife says, did you have to have such a big family? Because I insisted we go and sit down and talk it through. And, but I didn't want any triangulating. I told my parents at the same time, I didn't want to get caught in the, ooh, don't tell your dad, or, oh, don't tell your mom trap. That happens to so many gay kids and LGBTQ folks. It's like, I mean, some things you can't hide, but I could hide. I was 27 years old. I mean, I didn't know I was hiding, frankly, but that's a whole different story. I think we are intentional about holding this family together, and we believe, and my parents, what they taught us most of all was Jesus is my north. And that's an E. Stanley Jones statement. That's all E. Stanley Jones. If you don't know E. Stanley Jones, you need to know his legacy. But Jesus is my north. And that is how we have all lived our lives.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I'm doing a lousy job of giving short answers. So.
No, you're doing great, because this is a long form podcast, so more words versus less.
Okay.
We're good.
So listeners, we love you if you're still here.
Oh, they're still here. So, knowing a little bit of your biography, you have served in so many different spaces throughout the UMC. And some very inside of it, and some, sort of adjacent to it. But as a layperson, and I, even as I was looking over some of your biography, I think some would wonder, like, wow, like, I wonder if Sarah ever had a call to clergy orders or to ordained ministry. Like, you're so devoted to the life of the church and to disciple making and to the work of justice. I mean, it's what we United Methodists do. Did you have a moment where you discerned, yes, and I'm going to do all of this as a layperson, or is that just the...
So when I was in junior high or so, I think, I remember writing a note to myself of some of my life expectations. I was way too young to do that, but I did it anyway. And I tucked it under my mattress, and it was be a missionary. Because some of my formative years were in Salina, Kansas. And back in the day, Salina, Kansas was in the heart of the U.S., and the highways went right through there. And so all of our missionaries who were home on their leave, where they would go and talk, they'd come home every so many years, they'd come home and spend months, if not a year, touring and raising the money for their next mission stint. And they would stay in our home. I just was enamored. And I mean, some of the missionaries I got to grow up meeting, and they'd come through, and Bishop Mortimer Arias from Bolivia would read me the funnies sitting on his lap when I was a kid. And you're talking about this amazing liberation theologian leader, and they'd get thrown out. The politics would sway, and they'd get thrown out, and so they'd come live with us. The mission was always my call. And so I never, and I'm grateful, because of course, if I had been called to preach I preached a million sermons, but I wasn't called to be an ordained clergy person. And if I had been, I have many friends who weren't able to fulfill that call in the United Methodist Church, and that would have been heartbreaking. And it was heartbreaking to lose so many friends, to have to find another denomination.
Absolutely.
But for me, it was never a call to be clergy. It was always a call to be mission. And then I joined the Peace Corps because a friend of our families who was with Global Ministry said, well, why don't you try the Peace Corps first? Because it was kind of painful. You graduate from college and you think you know something. He's like, well, since you don't really have any skills, why don't you join the Peace Corps first and let's see if you get some skills. And it was a brilliant thing, and I had a great experience, but I came home and was trying to decide my next move, and was given an opportunity to interview with Wesley Rankin Community Center in Dallas, which was a Hispanic community center. I got to lead for 14 years that ministry, and that's probably one of the most formative things I've ever done. It was very hard, and yet, my patron saint, so to speak, is Thomas, because Thomas, it's a put your hands in the wounds and know that I am God.
Yeah.
And that's been the way I saw my life in mission, was if I put the deeper into the wounds of our world I put my hands, the closer I encountered Jesus.
Yeah.
And it was precious. So it was painful, but it was precious. And yeah.
Well,
so I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You're doing great.
Am I on point?
Great.
I don't
yes. So ask this. What is there anything that's still with you from that time at Wesley Rankin that no matter what spaces you walk into, these are things that I'm still holding on to from that time there?
Well, my godson's on a plane to Spain today, and he's a result of my best friend coming out of that experience, and my godson. So that's one thing. I've been praying for him all day. Be safe.
Yeah.
He's a grown man, but still my nene. I gather as often as I can with people that experienced that with me, that I experienced it with them. I'm Facebook friends with a lot of the kids who've now become adults and have their own children and even grandchildren. That is formative for me. I'm still very, and now I was there so long that when you can almost end up with founder syndrome in nonprofit. So I did give new leadership its space. It's been years, and but I absolutely learned so much. And I learned, this is kind of off topic, but my sister was the youth director of Highland Park United Methodist Church, which is, I don't know, it used to be 10 or 12,000 members in Dallas, right next to the SMU campus. And here I was in this little mission in the inner city. And she actually had more tragic death in her first few years than I did, partly because I just didn't know the youth well enough yet, but partly because we forget that regardless, and I should have said Highland Park, it's next to SMU. It's a very high income congregation. But those kids are committing suicide. Those kids are living under other challenges. Those kids are cracking their cars up, drinking and driving, or whatever. My kids, then I did bury a lot of children. Painful loss of both from gang. There was a moment, I'm just babbling, you're going to have to edit this, but there was a moment when the Columbine shootings took place. I became an expert, evidently, in youth violence. And so I was on all these programs talking about youth violence, which was a little bit offensive to me because I'd been dealing with youth violence for years, but until Columbine, Colorado, white kids started shooting each other. It didn't, and I'm not diminishing the pain in Columbine in any way.
It also became newsworthy.
It became,
and then when
my kids were being killed. It didn't catch
Right.
anyone's attention. My kids being my community center kids. I went to bail a kid out of jail one time, and I said, "I think you have one of my kids here." And they looked at me like, "No, we don't." I said, "Yeah, you do." And I didn't realize that my language was confusing them because he was a college student, and I was not that much older than he was. So, but he was also African American, and so they couldn't figure out how it was a small. And they had one kid in jail, and he was, 21-year-old semi-heavyweight boxer, African-American kid. They didn't think he was mine. So that was funny. But yeah, sorry.
No.
Do I bring anything with me, my brother? It is in my cells. And I will tell you, and I don't think we do this enough as a church, but I realized way later in life that we don't put in we don't intentionally consider how much PTSD our mission workers, our clergy who are facing trauma all the time have. I can no longer serve on a jury because it doesn't matter what the caseload is, whatever they bring before me. I had a panic attack and had to be released from a jury. It's a longer story. I have a whole sermon on it because the trial was going to be a child abuse situation that I had lived from the perspective of the family that lost the infant. I could not do that.
Yeah.
And I will say when they ask, have you ever been a victim of crime? I went, no. And then some lady says, I got my car stolen. I said, oh, is that the deal? Oh, well, I've had my car stolen several times. And then I thought, oh, well,
yeah,
because but if you compartmentalize, which in ministry we do, we compartmentalize because we have to function, and frankly, in the gay community, in the LGBTQ community, we have to compartmentalize because we have to function in this world. And so, if you as we try to integrate those things, it's lovely, but we're only human, and it takes a lot of work to integrate all of that.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, yes, I bring Wesley Rankin with me in every breath I take.
I really appreciate that for so many reasons. It resonates with me.
You're in campus ministry.
I mean, the whole life. And
a man of color.
And the compartmentalization, it being in ourselves, and that's how you answered the question. You bring all these stories with you. You bring these faces with you, and these moments where you're the one showing up at the prison. Yeah.
Well, they had my number. I still have the same phone number. It was my pager number, and I still have it to this day. I carried it with me because it hasn't happened in probably 6 or 8 years, but because it's been a long time since I was there. 20 years, but I would get a call on Mother's Day every now and then. And I don't have my own children, but when a kid calls you and says, hey, I was hoping this was still your number because I just want to thank you for filling in this gap for me. And I wasn't going to give it. I've had different jobs who said, oh, we can't transfer that number over. So then I don't want your phone. I don't. This is my number, and so I've kept it all these years since 90, 91.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Sarah, take us on the journey. Wesley Rankin, and then that takes you to.
Oh, you want me to do the journey of my career? I can do this pretty fast. I won't belabor it, but. So I was offered the opportunity to serve on the extended cabinet in North Texas as the director of urban strategies, and had an amazing experience there. It was one of those moments where I knew that I either needed to stay at Wesley Rankin for the rest of my career, because if you stay too long at the fair, you better see it through. Yeah. And or it was, and I was kind of hungering for a bigger canvas to paint on. But I was very happy where I was, so it was a touch, but my wife was ready to step out of her. She'd been kind of carrying the financial burden for us. And she was in kind of a trying time in her career. She's a journalist. That should tell you everything you need to know. And she was ready to step out and do other things. And so we made the decision that this would be the best thing for both me and for our family, for us. And so I became the director of urban strategies for the North Texas Conference for 4 years. And about 2 years into it, I realized that Bishop Bill Oden was my bishop, and he was great. But I realized he kept putting job opportunities in front of me. And I realized I was on a grant and he was retiring. And I went, oh, wait, I left a very secure job for a 4-year gig. And so I went and did an MBA at SMU. I decided if I was going to go big or go home, right? And I decided to go and get an MBA because I I wanted to stay in nonprofit, but I just know nonprofits, all of our church ministries, the last thing we do is run them well,
Right.
in the financially. That's fiscal is our last, anyway. So I did that, and that opened the door for me to be the CEO of the United Methodist Reporter. And I did that and loved it. I want to back up and say my deal with God, from the moment I put that under my mattress that said I want to be in mission, my deal with God was, dear God, I really don't want to knock on doors. But if you open a door, I'll go through it. So whatever you put in front of me, if I feel like it's truly of you, I will go through the door.
Yeah.
And so I left Wesley Rankin because I felt like it was a God thing, and then did the Reporter, and I was there, and then was asked to consider applying for the World Editor and Publisher of the Upper Room, and I did that, and then that was for 5 or 6 years, and then became the executive director at Scarrett Bennett Center, and was there for 5 or 6 years. I'm not good at time, y'all. Sorry, I didn't look it up.
Yeah.
And then stepped out. I felt like I had managed people and property and up boards of directors and all of that managing. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And so now I don't manage anyone but myself. I don't get paid anymore, but I just work with my siblings, and we're doing this Disciple Bible Study app. And well, it's a Bible. It's a study app, but right now it only has Disciple Bible on it. Yeah. So that's why.
So when I
may have missed something in there. I don't remember. But
we
met when I was at the Upper Room, right?
Yeah. And I met you at an event. I think it was in Texas.
It was. You're right. Maybe we met.
I think that's where I saw you. Okay. The first time I saw you, and I think you were talking about leadership development. And I don't know if that's exactly what you were talking about, but I walked into this space where you were leading, and you were developing leaders in that room. And one of the things I heard you say in that space, and later on you come and do an event with me and my team in Miami, but I heard you say in that space, friends, it's time to put your big girl panties on. And it was a call to really, like, for me, settle the issues about, like, am I a leader? Am I not a leader? Am I doing this or that? And for a young campus minister who did not feel called to clergy orders, was in the closet at the time, but had things in my hands that I needed to lead. You were a person that sort of said, stop playing around with this. Like, come on. And when you came and did that event for us, it was an event with young people, and mostly so many of my team members were in that room. And it wasn't just the sessions that you led, but it was the way you engaged the young adults. It forced all of us to, like, put our big girl panties on. It just forced us to grow up. It called us. I don't want to say forced. It called us to really live into our callings and our gifts and what we felt like God was asking of us. That was probably 12 years ago now. And yet I can tell you, that circle of people, we still talk about Sarah Wilke. So my question, in these different spaces that you have led and worked and operated, what holds us back from really leading, especially laity, but also those who find themselves in marginalized positions? What holds us back from really stepping into the room, being ready to lead with confidence?
Wow. Take a second here. We have so many people who surround us in life and tell us we can't do it. And I'm blessed. I was able to play basketball just after Title IX began. And our coach used to circle the free throw line with the whole team and make you shoot free throws with them yelling at you to prepare for in the stands, which girls basketball in the 70s didn't have a lot of people in the stands, but still, but that was, and, I think we have lots of people who are around us telling us we can't do it sometimes. And I think we have to push those voices out and embrace what we can do. And, it used to be you needed to shore up your weaknesses. That was the way it was always said. And now there's this kind of move that says, find other people to do what you're weak in because it's their strength.
Yeah.
And lead from your strength. And so I think I was sort of, I have to say, and I'm going to give my mom a lot of credit. And I had an amazing mother. Not everybody's so blessed. And I'm aware of that. But I had this amazing mother who made sure that we didn't do shame in our home. It just wasn't a thing. And if even those put down jokes from when we were kids, you're so low you could crawl under a snake with a top hat on. Remember those jokes that kind of went around? Maybe you don't. If you don't, I'll try to dig up more. But that was the one. That was kind of my go-to. You're so low you could crawl under a snake with. My mom wasn't having it. And her line in our home was, you have the whole world to put you down. So as a family, we're going to build each other up. And that's how she lived it. So in the leadership realm, not everyone's called to stand in the pulpit for 10,000 people. That's true. But as disciples of Jesus Christ, we are all called to bring our A game, not our B game, bring our A game, give our best fruits. So, everybody worries about whether the tithe is on your net or your gross. And that's not just about money.
Wow.
But if we're going to tithe our best, I'm thinking we ought to do it on our gross. If you're doing it on your net, that really means you're giving Caesar the first 10%. So no, God gets the first 10%, whether that's your time, your heart, your prayer, your presence, your gifts, or your service. So that's kind of, for me, the whole leadership paradigm is, what are you doing with the gifts God's given you? And whether it's I was kind of hoping, I had this great saying I used to say when I did leadership things. They said, now the only thing you leave when you move from one job to the next is your integrity. So when you put what you pack in your briefcase is your integrity. I thought that was always a good line, but no, you pull out the big girl. Sure, thanks.
That one was good too.
Yeah,
that was good too.
Well, integrity is huge. Leadership demands integrity.
Yeah. And
but really just to own your space.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that a little bit here. I have young women who come up to me, and I particularly have used this with young women. Own your space. Now, people who are marginalized, I want to go ahead and say something here. I grew up a white, middle-class, highly educated woman. I also came into leading a not-for-profit with a name recognition. I had so much privilege walking into that role. I could afford to take the job. You may have picked me first of your three on the list or not. We'll never know. But I know for a fact they offered the job to 5 other people who turned it down because the wage was so low. But I had my savings from the Peace Corps, because Peace Corps puts a little money away for you. And I'm such a tightwad. None of my Peace Corps friends could believe it, but I actually came home with money in the bank because I was such a tightwad. And I came home and I had no college debt, because back in that day, you could actually go to college without debt. And my grandparents had given us a little bit of money. So I had enough to get a little used car. When I came back from the Peace Corps, I had a little used car and a little bit of savings, not a lot. But I always had family support if something, if I'd had a major medical issue, I didn't even have health insurance. Well, if you were a person with any debt, you could not have taken that job.
Yeah.
If you had a family, I was working 24/7, 7 days a week, because I had nothing else to draw my attention.
Yeah.
So I was 23 years old, had all the time in the world. So privilege beyond belief. And so I'm very protective of particularly women of color. No offense, but that's where I've spent most of my this process in my heart and head, is women of color who know very much the needs of their community and don't have the Rolodex the contacts, the name recognition. So people look at me at 23 in my little blue Navy suit I got at Dillard's and write me a check for $1,000 for my thing. Mm-hmm. If you don't look like them and they don't know your pedigree, they go, oh, that's a great idea. You should build a board of directors. Well, will you be on my board? Oh, no. My board, oh, prestigious to be, because I was building it up and I have the United Methodist Women's support out there. I mean, friends, we cannot say enough. If you're not engaged with the United Women in Faith, join nationally. Engage.
Yeah.
And women, this is our legacy from our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers. And I don't just leave inheritance sitting on the table.
Come on.
And I'm inheriting this, both the work and the gifts and assets of all of that. We need to be paying attention because we have real stuff there. So just at a
really glad you said
a lot of people have had a life because of the work of the United Methodist Women. So anyway, I digressed.
No,
which
that's
I do.
very, very good.
Where were we?
We were talking about leadership.
Leadership.
But
that would lead to the United Women in Faith. Leadership. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, and I'm jumping around a little bit. I'm looking at this flyer for Be a Disciple study app, and it's just sort of profound to me that your parents write this curriculum, Disciple Bible study, and it's almost like you are, in a very similar way, taking that inheritance and legacy and moving it forward. I don't know, is that what it feels like, or is it?
No. The burden of it is huge because no one expected 3 million people to take Disciple Bible Study.
3 million.
Well, that's the number we've been getting for years and years.
Yeah.
And it's in countries all over the world. That's a dumb statement, isn't it? Countries only all over the world. Sorry. Woo! It's in, I don't know how many languages. We built the app. We've done a couple of things. If we want to talk about that for a second, it's beadisciplestudy.app.com. If you leave off the word app, you'll end up at the Be a Disciple site, which is also Bethea Institute, but that's distance learning on Blackboard, and it's more for people who want to get a certificate in youth ministry or lay speakers, or you can do Disciple on it. And there's lots of wonderful classes. You can go look at that. But we're talking today about beadiscipleapp.com. We built this app because of a couple of things. One, we realized, particularly in COVID, although we had started thinking about this early on, but Zoom kind of allowed us. There were some things that came out of COVID that have been a blessing, Zoom being one of them. All these people who were cut off, shut-ins aren't just the elderly.
Right.
Shut-ins are also young moms with children they need to put to bed, or people like me who don't really like to drive at night. I never had good vision. It doesn't have anything to do with my age. Just night vision and I are good friends. And I go to a church that's way across town. So Zoom has been a gift. Zoom, one Christmas, that was our Christmas as a family, right? We were Zooming. We were all making Christmas cookies and showing each other art and voting on Zoom. Anybody else do this kind of thing? Yeah, I'm seeing nods in this room. If you're out there in the air, you can nod. So we built this app to do two things. We wanted what we believe in more than anything, and what is the most true of Disciple Bible Study, is the small group experience is transformational. So the content's great, but the small group experience is transformational. And a lot of times we want to just do 4 and 6 week studies, and we'll have lots of those on the app at some point. But by being in Disciple for 20, we're using Disciple Fast Track, which is 24 weeks instead of 34. Disciple 1 was 34 weeks. 35 years ago, you would go to somebody else in the church's home or host it in your home, and 12 people would gather around your TV and watch on the VCR. It was the first product out of the publishing house to use the VCR. So it was a cutting edge whole thing. Yeah. And you'd watch the scholar give their talk. Reverend Zan Holmes would open it up. And Reverend Dr. Zan Holmes, who's amazing, and his voice is, the best. And then you'd watch the scholar video, and then you'd begin, and it was 2.5 hours. It was and this was every week for 34 weeks, right? And there's an audible, huh?
Yeah.
So my sister, who's a Christian educator, about 8 years ago, I think, reduced it down to 24 weeks, and she made 12 weeks in the Old Testament, 12 weeks in the New, because it was always Old Testament, New Testament. Now we have taken it and we've made it so. And what I love about the app is two things that really, I think I've said two things 30 times on here. People are going to laugh. But the app allows you to engage with your group throughout the week, which when you do a weekly study at your church, you come in on Tuesday and you discuss what you read for the last week and you see each other next week. Here we have a prayer wall where you're constantly in prayer with one another, as constant as you want to look at your app. And you can turn off those notifications, but we really encourage people to please notify. We have a message board. We found that a lot of times the group discussion would end, but somebody would say, there's a book. I'm going to post that on the message board. Hey, this is an article I read or a book I read about this, or I did some research after the fact, and you might want to know this. So it's that engagement every day throughout the week if you want to be. There's a human condition, and then the discussion question kicks it off. And that discussion question throughout the week, sometimes people will come in a second time or even a third time and say, ooh, I just read what so-and-so wrote. That I see it this way too. And there's a conversation that takes place there.
Yeah.
There's also everything you used to do in Disciple when you got to the meeting, besides read, was, you did a lot of research together. You watched the scholar videos. No, you do all of that before you get into the conversation. So the meetings are an hour and 15 minutes for Disciple 1, an hour and 30 minutes for Disciple 2, because there's a spiritual formation component to Disciple 2. And so it's all on Zoom. We also said our clergy are exhausted. We as lay people can lead these.
Yeah.
Now, some clergy want to. My church has been through a lot of clergy turnover. We got blown away in the tornado. My pastor wanted to lead it because he said, there's a lot of people who I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I've only been here now he's been there maybe a year. But, when you have, we're worshiping in a school, so we don't have that continuity. So he wants to get to know the congregation. But you have this daily interaction. You have the assignments are read too. It's all on Audible or on audio, or you can text, speech to text. You can do all these things. We just made it incredibly accessible. And one of the great things they used to sell at the publishing house were bags to carry your disciple book and manual. And, people lug it. And people say, I was going through the airport. I had my disciple bag with all my stuff. Well, now it's in my phone. Yeah. Everything's in my phone. All my answers are there. All my questions are there. Everything's there. And I can use my iPad. It's on every platform. It's in beta, so it's still a little glitchy, friends. It's glitchy, but we're working them out hard and fast. And our developer is in Jakarta, Indonesia, but he's a disciple grad that was a bishop. My parents started these bishop scholars at Southwestern College, bringing kids from all over the world into Winfield, Kansas to get their college degree. Mostly bishop's kids at first, but then it became kids of that the bishop would recommend, up and comer leaders in their conference. And this young man went back to Indonesia and built the #1 app in Asia a few years ago. And so we asked him to help build this for us. So it's all very connectional. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So anyway,
Sarah, there's so many things that I want to ask you about, and we have run out of time in this space. But everything that we've talked about so far is just your story. I'll speak for myself as a gay man. Your story has, in just watching you, just given me fuel to keep going. Even as our church is still on its journey to perfection, and we find ourselves in the church in this moment where, to the degree that we've been included, there's still vast amounts of work that still needs to be done, and harm that we have compartmentalized and are still working through. And even these last few years of disaffiliations and to see you walk into Convocation. You're still here. You're still here, as Reverend Pamela Lightsey told us today. And you being here has just been an inspiration to me, for sure. But I know a group of students out of Florida. They're not students anymore. They're all old like me. But a group of students out of Florida. The work that you did through Upper Room. I mean, just countless number of folks across the planet. People that I know that because you invited them to bring a devotion, like just deeply impacted by those. There's so many things. So I am going to reach out to you for a part 2. And anybody who knows Bar the Conference knows this is a long form podcast. So we literally just got started. And that's just the way that it is. So, but thank you for sharing your story today, and just being the inspirational leadership that particularly many of us in the queer community and the church have needed. So thank you. And can we thank Sarah?
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Bar of the Conference is produced by the team at Wesley's Revival, a ministry of Studio Wesley. Subscribe to this show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or Google platforms so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.